The scorching summer sun of 1878 beat down mercilessly upon the dusty main street of Promise Creek, Wyoming Territory, as Nora Daniels clutched the eviction notice in her trembling hands. The sheriff had delivered it with a sympathetic but firm nod before turning away, leaving her alone on the weathered porch of the millinery shop she had poured her heart and savings into over the past year. 3 days, she whispered to herself, the paper crinkling in her grip. 3 days to come up with $50 or lose everything. Nora had arrived in Promise Creek 14 months ago, a 22-year-old widow with nothing but determination and skillful hands. Her husband Thomas had died of pneumonia just 6 months into their marriage, leaving her alone and vulnerable in a world that offered few options for women on their own. The millinery shop had been her salvation, a chance to use her talent for creating beautiful hats and accessories while building a modest but respectable life. But Promise Creek had its hierarchies, its silent rules about who belonged and who didn't. The town's elite, led by the banker's wife Mrs. Hollister and the influential widow Mrs. Montgomery, had taken an immediate dislike to the beautiful young widow who refused to bow her head in their presence. They found her independence threatening, her refusal to remarry suspicious, and they systematically turned the town's women against patronizing her shop. Nora folded the eviction notice and tucked it into her pocket, straightening her simple blue cotton dress before locking the shop door. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her despair. With her chin held high, she began walking toward the boarding house where she rented a small room, mentally calculating what few possessions she could sell to raise the money. As she passed the bustling Crown Saloon, a commotion erupted through its swinging doors. A tall man in a dust-covered duster coat stumbled backward onto the boardwalk, followed by the burly saloon owner. "Your kind ain't welcome here, Calloway," the owner shouted. "Take your Indian-loving ways elsewhere." The man straightened to his full height, adjusting his worn Stetson. "Those Indians are Cheyenne people with names and rights, Barton, and they weren't cheating. Get out of my sight before I let the boys finish what they started," Barton spat, retreating back into the saloon. The stranger turned, revealing a handsome face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, a startling blue against his tanned skin, met Nora's for a brief moment. She quickly looked away, continuing her path down the boardwalk. "Miss," his voice stopped her. "You dropped something." Nora turned to find him holding her handkerchief, which must have fallen when she tucked away the eviction notice. As she reached for it, their fingers brushed briefly. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway, Kieran Calloway." He tipped his hat. "New in town, just passing through, Nora Daniels," she replied with a small nod. "Welcome to Promise Creek, though it seems your welcome has been less than warm." A rueful smile crossed his face. "I've had worse." "You live here long enough to know when someone's been unfairly treated." She gestured toward the saloon. "What happened in there?" Kieran glanced back at the saloon and shrugged. "A couple of Cheyenne men came in to trade some furs. They were playing cards fair and square, but when they started winning, Barton accused them of cheating. I spoke up." Nora studied him carefully. Most men in Promise Creek wouldn't lift a finger to help the native people who had been pushed farther and farther from their ancestral lands. "That was brave and foolish." "Sometimes they're the same thing," he replied with a slight grin that made something flutter in her chest. A shout from down the street interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Hollister was approaching, her severe black dress and tight bun making her look even more formidable than usual. She was accompanied by her daughter, Emily, Mrs. Daniels. The older woman's voice cut through the air like a knife. "I see you've wasted no time finding new company." Nora felt her cheeks flush with anger and embarrassment. "I was just thanking Mr. Calloway for returning my handkerchief, Mrs. Hollister." The banker's wife gave Kieran a dismissive glance. "I'd advise you to be more selective about whom you converse with, Mrs. Daniels. Your reputation is already precarious enough." As they passed, Emily Hollister whispered just loudly enough to be heard, Mama says it's sinful, the way she carries on, refusing to remarry and running a business like a man. Kieran's eyebrows rose as the women continued down the street. Friendly folks around here. Nora's hands clenched at her sides. Exceedingly. She straightened her shoulders. I should go. Good day, Mr. Calloway. Wait, he called as she turned to leave. If you don't mind my asking, what sort of business do you run? I own the millinery shop on the corner. A bitter smile touched her lips. At least for the next 3 days. Before he could question her further, Nora hurried away, mortification burning in her chest. The last thing she needed was a handsome stranger's pity, especially one who would be moving on soon. That evening, Nora sat at the small table in her boarding house room, calculating figures for the 10th time. She had $17 saved, and her sewing machine might fetch another 15 if she was lucky. Even selling her mother's silver brooch and her wedding ring might not make up the difference. A knock at her door startled her. Her landlady, Mrs. Cooper, stood in the hallway, looking uncomfortable. There's a man asking for you downstairs, Mrs. Daniels. A Mr. Calloway. Nora's heart leapt inexplicably. Did he say what he wanted? No, but he's carrying a hat box from your shop. Mrs. Cooper's expression was disapproving. I don't need to remind you about the rules regarding gentlemen callers. Of course not, Nora replied, smoothing her hair and following the older woman downstairs. Kieran Calloway stood in the small parlor, hat in hand, looking decidedly out of place among the doilies and potted ferns. When he saw her, a smile broke across his face. Mrs. Daniels, I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all, Mr. Calloway, though I'm curious about your visit. He held out the hat box. I was hoping to commission some work if you're accepting orders. Nora took the box cautiously. You need a hat, not for me. He gestured toward the box. Take a look. Inside, Nora found a beautiful but badly damaged white Stetson, the crown crushed and the brim torn. This is expensive craftsmanship, but I'm not sure it can be saved. It belonged to my father, Kieran explained. Got trampled during a cattle drive years back. I've carried it around thinking someday I'd find someone skilled enough to restore it. Nora examined the hat more closely. This would require quite a bit of work, and specialized materials I'd need to order from Denver. Money's no object. His eyes held hers. I'm willing to pay $50 for the job, half now, half when it's done. Nora's breath caught, exactly the amount she needed. This couldn't be coincidence. You overheard about the eviction. Kieran didn't deny it. I did. But I'm not offering charity, Mrs. Daniels. This hat means a great deal to me, and I believe you're skilled enough to restore it. Pride warred with necessity in Nora's heart. Why would you help a stranger? Because I know what it's like to be judged unfairly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of bills. $25 now as a deposit, the rest when you're finished. Nora stared at the money. It would save her shop, give her breathing room. But accepting help from this man might confirm all the vicious whispers about her character. Take it, Kieran said softly. Prove them all wrong by succeeding. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Slowly, Nora reached out and took the money. I'll need at least 2 weeks to complete the work properly. I'll be around, he replied with a smile. I've decided Promise Creek might be worth staying in for a while. The next morning, as Nora opened her shop with renewed determination, she found herself watching the street for a glimpse of Kieran Calloway. She told herself it was merely to thank him properly in the light of day, but the flutter in her stomach suggested otherwise. By mid-morning, the bell above her door chimed, and Nora looked up eagerly. Her smile faltered when she saw Mrs. Montgomery and 2 other members of the Ladies' Aid Society entering her shop. Mrs. Daniels, Mrs. Montgomery began without preamble, we've come to address a matter of some delicacy. Nora straightened her spine. How may I help you ladies today? It's about your association with that Calloway person. Mrs. Montgomery's thin lips pressed together. It's been noted that he visited your boarding house last evening. He commissioned work from me, Nora replied evenly. His father's hat needs restoration. Mrs. Fitzhugh, the minister's wife, made a small sound of disbelief. "My dear, surely you understand how such meetings appear, particularly given Mr. Calloway's reputation." "His reputation?" Nora questioned, though she had a sinking feeling she knew what was coming. "He's known in these parts as an Indian sympathizer," Mrs. Montgomery explained as if discussing something obscene. "Rides with them, trades with them, some say he even lived among the Cheyenne for years. And this makes him dangerous," Nora challenged. "It makes him unsuitable company for a widow of your situation," Mrs. Montgomery sniffed. "We've been tolerant of your independent ways, Mrs. Daniels, but consorting with such a man crosses a line." "Tolerant," Nora couldn't contain her bitter laugh. "You've systematically turned every potential customer against me because I dared to support myself after my husband died. We've simply maintained certain standards. You've made my life miserable because I refused to marry the first man who offered after Thomas died," Nora interrupted, her patience finally snapping. "You call my independence sinful, but the real sin is how you treat anyone who doesn't conform to your narrow vision of propriety." Mrs. Fitzhugh gasped. "Such insolence! We came to warn you as Christian women," Mrs. Montgomery said coldly. "If you continue to associate with Kieran Calloway, you'll find what little standing you have in this community entirely destroyed. I believe I'll take my chances, ladies." Nora moved toward the door and held it open. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." After they left, Nora sank onto her stool, trembling with both fury and fear. She had just alienated the most influential women in town even further, and for what? A man she barely knew. The bell chimed again, and Nora looked up, half expecting the women to have returned. Instead, a young Cheyenne woman stood hesitantly in the doorway, a bundle of finely tanned deerskin in her arms. "Hello," Nora said, quickly composing herself. "Please come in." The woman stepped inside, her dark eyes taking in the shop. "You are the hat maker." "Yes, I'm Nora Daniels." "I am Singing Bird," the woman replied. "Kieran Calloway says you make beautiful things with your hands." Nora's heart skipped at the mention of his name. "You know Mr. Calloway," Singing Bird nodded. "He is friend to my people. He speaks your language, our language. He tells me you might trade." She unwrapped the bundle to reveal exquisitely decorated deerskin, adorned with intricate beadwork and quills in vibrant colors. "This is beautiful work," Nora breathed, running her fingers over the soft leather. "I make for trade." Singing Bird pointed to the hat displays. "For pretty things." Nora smiled genuinely for what felt like the first time in days. "I would be honored to trade with you." Over the next hour, Nora showed Singing Bird her collection of hats and accessories. The young woman selected a midnight blue bonnet with silver ribbon and a pair of lace gloves, offering deerskin and beadwork in exchange. Before leaving, Singing Bird hesitated. "The people in town, they do not like us. They do not like Kieran for being our friend." "Some people fear what they don't understand," Nora replied. "You are not afraid of what? Beautiful craftwork and honest trade?" Nora shook her head. "No, I'm not afraid." Singing Bird studied her for a moment. "Kieran says you are different. He is right." She placed a small beaded pouch on the counter. "A gift, not for trade." After Singing Bird left, Nora examined the pouch, finding inside a delicate pair of earrings made from polished blue stones and silver. A note was tucked beside them, written in a strong, clear hand. "These reminded me of your eyes. Dinner at the hotel restaurant tonight. KC." Nora held the note to her chest, a smile spreading across her face despite her better judgment. That evening, dressed in her best green dress with the new earrings catching the light, Nora entered the hotel restaurant. Conversation dimmed as heads turned, disapproving glances following her to the table where Kieran waited. He stood as she approached, his eyes warming appreciatively. "You look beautiful." "Thank you for the earrings," she said, taking the seat he offered, "though I'm not sure accepting them was wise." Kieran glanced around at the not-so-subtle stares. "Because of them, you've been in town long enough to know I'm already considered problematic." A widow who supports herself through honest work. He raised an eyebrow. Shocking indeed. Despite herself, Nora laughed. It's more than that. I refused to remarry when expected to, declined the attentions of Mr. Hollister's cousin, and generally failed to behave like a properly grieving widow should. How inconsiderate of you to value your independence, Kieran remarked dryly. The Ladies' Aid Society visited me today, Nora said, lowering her voice, to warn me about associating with you. Ah, he nodded thoughtfully, and yet here you are. Here I am, she agreed. Perhaps I'm tired of letting others dictate my choices. Kieran reached across the table, his fingers lightly touching hers. Then we have that in common. Throughout dinner, Nora was conscious of the stares and whispers, but for the first time in months she found herself not caring. Kieran told her of his travels, of the 4 years he'd spent with the Cheyenne after saving a chief's son from drowning, of his work as a scout and occasional cattle driver. What brought you to Promise Creek? She asked as they shared apple pie. Honestly, I was just passing through. His eyes held hers. Now I'm finding reasons to stay. Nora felt her cheeks warm. Mr. Calloway, Kieran, please. Kieran, she amended. I should warn you that being seen with me won't do your reputation any favors in this town. My reputation, he laughed. Darlin', my reputation was shot long before I met you. As they left the restaurant, Kieran offered his arm. Nora hesitated only a moment before taking it, ignoring the scandalized looks from a group of townspeople on the boardwalk. I'll walk you home, he said. The night was warm, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. They strolled slowly, reluctant for the evening to end. Tell me about your husband, Kieran said softly. The question surprised her. Most people avoided mentioning Thomas as if his death had rendered him unmentionable. Thomas was kind, she began. We married young. I was 18, he was 22. It was a good match, arranged by our parents, but we grew fond of each other quickly. She paused. When he died, I mourned him genuinely, but I also realized I'd never truly been in love with him. Is that why you didn't remarry? Partly, she admitted. But mostly because I discovered I valued my freedom. The shop gives me purpose, independence. Yet they call that sinful, Kieran observed. A woman making her own way, supporting herself. Nora shook her head. Apparently nothing could be more threatening. They reached the boarding house all too soon. On the porch, Nora turned to face him. Thank you for dinner. Thank you for your company. His voice was low, intimate in the darkness, despite the risk to your reputation. My reputation was already in tatters, she said with a small smile. What's a little more scandal? Kieran's hand came up to touch her cheek gently. May I call on you again? Nora knew she should refuse. Every moment spent with this man pushed her further from acceptance in Promise Creek. But looking into his eyes, she found she didn't care. Yes, she whispered. He leaned down, his lips brushing hers in the gentlest of kisses. It was brief, chaste even, but it sent warmth flooding through her body like nothing she'd ever experienced. Good night, Nora Daniels, he said softly, stepping back. Good night, Kieran Calloway. She watched him walk away, touching her fingers to her lips, aware that something fundamental had shifted in her world. The following days brought a flurry of activity to Nora's shop. Word had spread through the Cheyenne camp about her fair trading, and several native women visited, exchanging their crafts for Nora's millinery. The white women of Promise Creek might be boycotting her business, but Nora found herself busier than ever. She also worked diligently on restoring Kieran's father's hat, carefully rebuilding the crown and stitching the torn brim. Each evening, Kieran would arrive to walk her home, sometimes bringing small gifts, wildflowers, a book of poetry, once a perfect peach that they shared on the boarding house porch. 10 days after their first dinner together, Nora was closing her shop when Mrs. Hollister and Sheriff Taylor appeared at her door. Mrs. Daniels, the sheriff began uncomfortably, I'm afraid there's been a complaint. A complaint, Nora echoed, glancing between them. Mrs. Hollister's face was rigid with righteous indignation. You've been conducting trade with Indians, bringing them into town, encouraging them to frequent our establishments. I've been trading fairly with Cheyenne women who bring beautifully crafted goods, Nora corrected. And they've stayed exclusively in my shop. It's creating an unsafe environment, Mrs. Hollister insisted. These savages, they are not savages, Nora interrupted sharply. They're skilled artisans and traders. Sheriff Taylor cleared his throat. Mrs. Daniels, there's no law against trading with the Indians, but it's causing discomfort in the community. Discomfort, Nora laughed bitterly. Heaven forbid we experience discomfort while stealing their land and destroying their way of life, Mrs. Hollister gasped. Such talk is precisely why you're unfit to be a business owner in this town. Sheriff, I want this place closed down. On what grounds? Nora demanded. Moral turpitude, Mrs. Hollister declared triumphantly. Consorting with Indians and that Calloway person, conducting yourself inappropriately as a widow, that's not a legal reason to close a business. A deep voice interrupted from the doorway. Kieran stood there, his expression hard as he looked at the sheriff. And you know it, Taylor. Sheriff Taylor shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Calloway, this doesn't concern you. When you're harassing an innocent woman for conducting legitimate business, it concerns me. Kieran stepped fully into the shop. Mrs. Daniels has broken no laws. Unless you have a legal warrant, I suggest you leave her establishment. The sheriff hesitated, then nodded curtly. Come along, Mrs. Hollister. There's nothing to be done here today. As they left, Mrs. Hollister turned back, her eyes cold. This isn't over, Mrs. Daniels. Your sinful behavior will not be tolerated much longer. When they were gone, Nora sagged against the counter. Thank you. Kieran moved to her side. Are you all right? Yes, just, she shook her head, tired of fighting them, you shouldn't have to. His hands rested gently on her shoulders. Nora, come away with me. She looked up, startled. What? I'm leaving for Denver next week. Come with me. His eyes were intense, hopeful. There are opportunities there for someone with your talents, no small-minded gossips, no persecution for being independent. Kieran, I can't just... She faltered, the idea both terrifying and exhilarating. Why not? What's keeping you here except misery? His hands slid down to take hers. I know it's sudden, but I've never felt this way about anyone before. From the moment I saw you standing up to those women, I knew you were special. Nora's heart raced. You hardly know me. I know enough, he said softly. I know you're brave and kind and stubborn as hell. I know you treat everyone with dignity, regardless of their background. I know your smile makes me forget my own name. A laugh escaped her, half joy, half fear. You're asking me to leave everything I've built. I'm asking you to build something better, somewhere you'll be valued. He squeezed her hands. Think about it, that's all I ask. Later that night, Nora sat in her room, turning Kieran's proposal over in her mind, leave Promise Creek. Start over in Denver. The idea was simultaneously terrifying and liberating. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. Mrs. Cooper stood there, her face grave. There's a crowd gathering at your shop, Mrs. Daniels. I think there might be trouble. Nora hurried through the darkened streets, her heart pounding. As she approached her millinery, she saw a group of men with torches surrounding the building. Mrs. Hollister stood nearby, directing their actions. What are you doing? Nora cried, pushing through to the front of the crowd. Removing a blight from our community, Mrs. Hollister replied coldly. This shop has become a gathering place for Indians and their sympathizers. It cannot stand. This is my property, Nora protested, looking desperately toward Sheriff Taylor, who stood uncomfortably at the edge of the crowd. Sheriff, stop them. Before he could respond, another voice cut through the night. That's enough. Kieran strode into the circle of torchlight, his expression thunderous. Behind him came several Cheyenne men, including one elderly man wearing a chief's regalia. You have no right to destroy this woman's property, Kieran continued, placing himself between Nora and the mob. She's broken no laws. She's brought Indians into our town, someone shouted, corrupting our values. She made fair trades with people you've marginalized and abused, Kieran retorted. If that's corruption, your values need corrupting. The elderly Cheyenne man stepped forward. This woman, he said in heavily accented English, pointing to Nora, has shown respect to my people. Treated our women with honor, you would burn her place for this, Mrs. Hollister sneered. We don't recognize your authority here, Indian. Perhaps not, Kieran said, but you might recognize that Chief Grey Wolf and his people vastly outnumber you, and they're growing tired of your abuse. The crowd shifted nervously, noticing for the first time the dozen Cheyenne warriors who had materialized at the edges of the torchlight. Sheriff Taylor stepped forward. Everyone go home. There'll be no burning tonight. Sheriff, Mrs. Hollister protested. I said go home. His voice was firm. This stops now. Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd dispersed, leaving Nora standing with Kieran and the Cheyenne delegation. Thank you, she said to Chief Grey Wolf, bowing her head respectfully. The elderly man nodded. Calloway says you leave soon, for Big City. Nora glanced at Kieran questioningly. I mentioned the possibility, he explained. Grey Wolf and his people want to trade one more time before you go. I haven't decided yet, Nora admitted. Chief Grey Wolf studied her. This place, he gestured around, holds nothing but hate for you. Why stay? It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Nora looked at her shop, the business she'd built from nothing. It's mine, she said finally, everything I have. Things can be rebuilt, Kieran said softly. Happiness is harder to find. The chief nodded sagely. The young wolf speaks wisdom. He turned to leave, then paused. My people will watch your place tonight, no fires. After the Cheyenne departed, Nora and Kieran stood alone in the street. You should have told me you were speaking to them about me leaving, she said. I'm sorry. He took her hands. I was excited about the possibility. Nora looked up at him in the moonlight. Tonight proved they'll never accept me here. No, he agreed. They won't, but there are places where people like us can belong, people like us, people who see beyond boundaries. Who judge others by their character, not their race or gender or circumstances. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. People who aren't afraid to love freely. The word love hung in the air between them. Nora's breath caught. Is that what this is? Love. Kieran's smile was tender as he cupped her face. I believe it is. I love you, Nora Daniels. I love your courage and your kindness and your stubborn independence. Tears welled in her eyes. They call it a sin, you know, loving you. Then I'll be a sinner too, he whispered, bending to kiss her, properly this time, deeply and thoroughly, right in the middle of Promise Creek's Main Street. When they parted, Nora was breathless. I love you too, she admitted. God help me, I do. Come to Denver with me, he urged again. Start fresh where no one knows us or cares about our past. Nora looked back at her shop, thinking of all she'd sacrificed to build it. But what was a building compared to the chance for real happiness? Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll come with you. 2 weeks later, Nora stood on the platform of the Promise Creek train station, a trunk of belongings at her feet. She had sold her shop to a young woman from the next town over, someone untainted by Promise Creek's prejudices who might have a fighting chance. The restored Stetson that had brought Kieran into her life was now on his head, looking almost new. Mrs. Cooper had come to see her off, along with a few customers who had defied the town's unofficial boycott. Surprisingly, Sheriff Taylor was there too. Mrs. Daniels, he said awkwardly, I want to apologize for not doing more to protect you. You came through when it mattered most, she replied graciously. Denver's a fine city, he continued, more accepting of unconventional arrangements. Kieran, who had been checking their luggage, returned to Nora's side. We'll be boarding soon. The sheriff nodded. Take care of her, Calloway. I suspect she'll be the one taking care of me, Kieran replied with a grin, making Nora laugh. As they boarded the train, Nora caught sight of Mrs. Hollister and several other town matrons watching from across the street, their expressions a mixture of triumph and disapproval. Kieran followed her gaze. Having second thoughts, not one, she said firmly, taking his hand. Let them think what they want, we know the truth. The train whistle blew, and with a lurch they began pulling away from Promise Creek. Nora watched the town recede, feeling not loss but liberation. I've been thinking, Kieran said as they settled into their seats, about opening a trading post in Denver. specializing in native crafts fairly traded, with a millinery section, of course. Nora smiled, picturing it. I'd like that. And perhaps, he added, reaching into his pocket, we might consider making our arrangement more conventional after all. He opened his hand to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small sapphire. Marry me, Nora, not because society demands it, but because I want to build a life with you. Tears sprang to her eyes as she took the ring. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. As the train carried them toward their future, Nora thought about all that had transpired. She had been called sinful for daring to live on her own terms, for befriending those deemed unworthy, for loving a man who saw beyond society's arbitrary boundaries. But in Kieran's arms, being a sinner had never felt so much like salvation. 5 years later, on a bright spring morning in Denver, Nora Calloway stood in the doorway of their thriving shop, watching her husband show their 3-year-old daughter how to properly greet Chief Gray Wolf, who had become a regular visitor and dear friend. The trading post had flourished, becoming known throughout Colorado territory for its fair practices and quality goods. Nora's millinery designs were sought after by Denver's elite, and Kieran's connections with various tribes had created a robust network of artisans who received fair compensation for their work. "Mama," little Sarah called, running to Nora with a small beaded bracelet. "Look what Chief made for me." "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Nora said, lifting her daughter into her arms. Over Sarah's head, she met Kieran's loving gaze. They had found their place in the world not by conforming to others' expectations, but by creating a space where everyone was welcome, regardless of background. What Promise Creek had called sinful, Denver celebrated as visionary. As Kieran joined them, sliding an arm around her waist, Nora leaned into his embrace, grateful for the courage they'd both shown in following their hearts. Sometimes the greatest act of bravery was simply to love without reservation, even when the whole world called it wrong. They had been called sinners for loving, but together, they had built something far more powerful than sin or virtue. They had built a family, a community, and a legacy of acceptance that would outlive them both. And that, Nora thought as she kissed her husband in the bright Colorado sunshine, was worth every whisper, every condemnation, every sacrifice. Love always was.